This was once a game of life and death. The object was to keep the heavy ball in motion without using hands or feet. The losers lost not only the game, but their lives, becoming human sacrifices to the gods. It was here on this surface, in the once magnificent city of Palanque in Mexico, that the game was played about 1,300 years ago. The losers were slaughtered here in the courtyard. What kind of people who built so boldly deep in the jungle would conceive of a game in which the losers would pay with their lives? They were the Maya, a people who lived their lives in accordance with the heavens and who believed that the gods created them from corn. They developed a complex writing system, practiced astronomy, and built majestic pyramids with little more than stone tools. All this at a time when Europe still languished in the Dark Ages. When the Maya were settling their cities a millennium and a half ago, monks in the Sinai Desert were inscribing biblical texts on animal skins. In China, the earliest stirrups used for horseback riding were invented. And in West Africa, wild rice was first cultivated to become a staple food. The years that their civilization flourished, from 250 to 900 of the Common Era, the Maya built many cities. Palanque stood supreme among them. Covering an area about the size of France, the land the Maya would eventually come to rule spread across modern-day Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, Belize, and even Mexico. Then, abruptly, at the end of the 9th century, their vast civilization mysteriously collapsed.
It's as though they were hit by a neutron bomb. Stuff remains virtually intact, a few places where you see some close, small-scale devastation, but most buildings not destroyed. People just walk away.
But why? Why did the people forsake what must have taken generations to create? Perhaps Palanque holds the answer. Considered the most beautiful of all Maya sites, it once had a population of between 10 and 20,000. Only a small percentage of the stone city has been unearthed, covering about half a mile of area. Many buildings remain hidden beneath the surface. Those that can be seen are the ceremonial center, a palace, and a series of temples. For centuries, this once majestic place was buried in jungle growth and shrouded in silence. When Hernan Cortez conquered Central America in the 1500s, he passed within a mere 30 miles of it. But neither he nor the Indians accompanying him chanced upon the ruins. It wasn't until the mid-18th century that the lost city was discovered by a Spanish priest and announced to the world. Eager to learn more about it, the King of Spain sent Captain Antonio del Rio to Palenque to investigate. Captivated by the great buildings, Del Rio concluded only Greeks or Romans could have been capable of constructing such architectural magnificence.
It was hard for the Spanish and the early visitors to understand that there had been independent invention of civilization outside the hearth of the West. So when they saw the high civilization, whether it be Aztec or Maya, they assumed that it had to come from Europe or someplace that was familiar to them.
By the mid-1840s, the notion of Palenque being the ruins of an advanced civilization could no longer be challenged. Only the identity of its builders was. Some proclaimed that it was originally an Egyptian colony. Others believed the builders were members of the lost tribes of Israel. Lured by such exotic tales, John Lloyd Stephens, a New York lawyer turned travel writer, and British artist Frederick Catherwood set out to explore Palenque for themselves in 1839. They would spend a full year hacking their way through snake-infested jungles in search of the fabled ruins. They would suffer hunger, bouts of malaria, and even imprisonment at the hands of suspicious natives. When they finally reached their objective, their hardships paled in comparison to the sight that confronted them.
All the arts which embellish life had flourished in this overgrown forest. Orators, warriors, and statesmen, beauty, ambition, and glory had lived and passed away, and none knew that such things had been or could tell of their past existence. John Lloyd Stephens.
When Stephens and Catherwood entered the palace of Palenque, they came upon the names of earlier explorers inscribed on the walls. But Stephens could not read the strange inscriptions that were scattered throughout the ruin. He was certain that the hieroglyphs would tell Palenque's history, but there was no Rosetta Stone here. Standing before the glyphs, Stephens was frustrated, for he had no key to unravel their message. Despite their weakened condition, the two explorers would spend months studying the area, making drawings and carefully describing everything they saw. Stephens and Catherwood's collaborative book about their discoveries not only captured the imagination of the reading public, but was the first writing to hint at the possibility that Palenque may have been built by an indigenous people. Their conclusions triggered a turning point in Maya research.
There were many people who felt that these civilizations were too elaborate, the architecture too spectacular to have been produced by the ignorant Indians that we find here today. It was a kind of prejudice that it required someone from Europe or from Asia, anywhere else but the Native Americans.
Though controversial, by the turn of the 20th century, most scholars agreed that local people had indeed built Palenque. The sacred world of the Maya should never have become a mystery, as these were people who left behind a written record. It was one of only 5 writing systems developed in the ancient world. Their texts were said to be a chronicle of their dreams and imbued with magical powers. Theirs was a unique writing, as sophisticated as that of ancient Egypt. When Spanish priests arrived in the 16th century, they found hundreds of codices, forerunner to the modern book. The missionary, Bishop Diego de Landa, wanted to convert the local people to Christianity. Horrified to find mention of human sacrifice in the codices, Landa believed that if he destroyed the books, the blood sacrifices would also end. In a single night in 1592, Landa burned the documents, forever erasing the history of one of the greatest of civilizations.
If you wish to change worldview and you wish to gain dominance over people, you have to kill their past, and you have to kill their own languages. You have to kill what gives them independence of mind. And that's what Landa was doing. He was, in his way of thinking, killing the devil.
Despite Bishop Landa's attempt to obliterate the past, 4 codices miraculously survived. It is from these that scholars learned of the Maya's sophisticated mathematical system. They had calculated the movements of the night sky thousands of years into the past and well into the future. For a civilization that existed more than 1,000 years before our own time, these calculations were astonishingly correct. Their calendar differed from ours by a mere 33 seconds per solar year. It is believed that Palenque even housed an astronomical observatory.
The famous tower in the center of the palace at Palenque could indeed have been used as an observatory. From the tower, one does watch the setting sun on the winter solstice descend into the top of that building.
The Maya relied on their astronomer priests to predict the best days to plant, to marry, and perhaps even to die. According to the Maya, the world's present cycle of creation is predicted to end on December 23rd, 2012. Today, many of their descendants fearfully await that day. But where did these inventive people come from?
We know that Maya are Native Americans, and therefore they walked into this continent all the way through from the Bering Straits, probably between 20 and 40,000 years ago. Now, when the Maya in particular came into Maya country is a different question, and they came into Maya country at least 1,000 years BC. So there have been Maya in this area for at least 3,000 years. Before that time, we only have a small population of hunter-gatherers in the jungles around here.
The Maya were deeply tied to the soil. Even today, centuries later, certain beliefs persist. According to their mythology, the gods created man from mixing maize with blood. Blood became the mortar of all Maya life, and corn the sustenance.
Today, corn is the major staple of the Maya, but it's also treated with reverential respect. For example, I was living in a Maya community, and this little child was throwing corn on the floor, and the mother said, "Mumbasha yate santo ishimi," or "Don't play with sacred corn." And it was a daily statement, but you don't take this for granted, and it's our life bread. And to be Maya is to be a maize farmer.
As farmers, the Maya worshipped the rain, sun, and wind, and lived in communities where ritualized religion became a way of life. From these humble beginnings arose an incredibly complex civilization 1,750 years ago. But the view of the ancient Maya as peace-loving astronomer priests changed radically with a grisly discovery 73 feet below ground. The perception of the Maya as peace-loving astronomer priests was dramatically altered by a discovery at Palenque in 1952. A Mexican archaeologist, Alberto Ruz, had spent 4 years excavating the site. He was fascinated by the city. Huge panels covered with hieroglyphs were everywhere, often illustrating scenes of religious ritual. Ruz was particularly intrigued by a pyramid known as the Temple of Inscriptions. At first glance, the structure appeared to be similar to pyramids found in Egypt.
You know, when the casual visitor takes the first look at a place like Palenque and sees, pyramids, burial chambers, strange hieroglyphic writing, the first thing that's going to course through his or her mind is ancient Egypt. It's obvious. But in fact, you have to scratch a little deeper to look beyond the apparent similarities, in fact, to see how different these ancient civilizations really were.
On the floor of the temple, Ruz noticed something odd. Unlike most Maya buildings, which were finished with stucco, this one was made of tightly fitted flagstones. One of the stones had a peculiar row of holes running along its surface. To Ruse, this suggested that something lay beneath. Ruse decided to raise the stone. As it slowly gave way, it revealed an innocent-looking pile of rubble. It was then that Ruse saw the outline of a vaulted stairway. It would take 2 long years in this confined, humid space to clear the debris away. At the bottom of the 73rd step, Ruse came upon a chamber. At last, the destination of the passageway had been reached.
To my amazement, out of the shadow arose a vision from a fairy tale. I entered the mysterious chamber with a strange sensation. I was the first in 1,000 years to walk these steps. The impression was that of an abandoned chapel. Alberto Ruse.
There is a feeling almost of that these things have not been touched for 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 years, and we are disturbing the past. We're learning about the past, but there is that moment of hesitation that I think all of us, all archaeologists have, when you begin to sort of come across these things that were left very purposefully by the Maya to venerate their world, to allow their world to continue into the future.
The chamber that Ruse had reached was not merely an underground room. In its center was a large, mysterious object covered by a limestone slab. Below the heavy lid, Ruse finally discovered the answer and the true purpose of the descending passageway with its mysterious chamber. In the darkness lay the remains of a man, adorned by pearls, beads, and a lifelike jade mask. It was a chilling sight. At the time of its discovery, nobody could identify the corpse.
Oh, I see what you mean, yes. Yeah, you can't tell in this, can you? Toot. Quail. No, toot is a quail. Toot is a snail.
It was believed that the mysterious glyphs on the sarcophagus held the answer to the identity of the corpse, but the code to the Maya writing had not yet been broken. Curiously, more than a century earlier, John Lloyd Stephens had predicted that the strange engravings on the walls would hold the key to the mystery, and he was right. But it would take several years before experts would be able to decode the inscriptions.
All of a sudden, in 3.5 hours, Palanque ceased being an anonymous place and became a place with 7 kings, including Pakal.
The human remains in the crypt that Ruse had worked so hard to discover turned out to be none other than the great king Pakal, one of the most important rulers in all of Maya history.
Alberto Ruse's discovery of Pakal's tomb is really one of the great moments in Maya studies and studies in the New World, and I think really put on the map the ancient Maya world, and it really rivals the discovery of King Tut's tomb.
The hieroglyphs spoke of vibrant and flourishing kingdoms. They revealed that the stone pyramids, now grayed by the ravages of time, were once part of opulent city-states. But with the discovery also came a flood of questions, often provoking outlandish theories.
Even with the discovery of the great tomb in the base of the Temple of the Inscriptions, what did at least one crazy interpreter of the scene have to do? He took the image on the surface of the sarcophagus, and instead of reading it the way it is supposed to be read, he turned it 90 degrees, tipped it over, and instead of Pakal reclining, falling into the jaws of death, what do we have? We have Pakal driving his spaceship like some crazy motorcycle right into the future.
Indeed, some had speculated that this depiction may have represented an ancient astronaut, but the truth may lie in a simpler, more down-to-earth explanation.
We now realize, and actually people have thought this for a long time, that what we're looking actually is the death and resurrection of Pakal. So what he's doing on his back, he's inside an offering bowl, and he's surrounded by the jaws of the underworld.
The stone lid depicts Pakal's descent from the world of the living to the domain of the dead, the underworld where, in Maya cosmology, rebirth must begin. Especially puzzling in the tomb was the red dust coating the walls and bones. It would eventually be identified as cinnabar, a deadly poison derived from mercury. The king's corpse was covered with the lethal substance.
His entire body was covered with red also. And all of the linings inside the sarcophagus also were bright red. The royal skeletons are painted red, and no matter how high your status is and how wealthy you are, if you're not a member of the royal family and you're buried elsewhere in the valley, you're not painted red. In other words, when you've got a red painted skeleton, by God, you've got either a king or you've got a member of the royal family.
Unlike ancient Egypt, before the discovery of King Pakal's tomb, it had been assumed that no Mesoamerican pyramid had ever been used as a burial site.
The Egyptian pyramids are really funerary pyramids only. The Maya pyramids are actually functioning buildings that function every day within the society, and they did bury people within those. But the Maya buried people within their houses. The large pyramids that we see at Palanque and at other sites were in fact part of the household structure of the ruling family.
The Maya forged a civilization founded not only on intellect and engineering skill, but also on the art of war. The search for the people who ruled over this brooding landscape more than 1,000 years ago is a quest that follows a trail of intrigue and blood. Blood, according to the Maya, came from the gods themselves and flowed as a gift in the veins of man.
We're constantly giving back to the gods in a state of blood debt by giving them human blood. The world constantly functioning in a kind of blood debt, and as long as it can be offered in sufficient quantities, the world is going to keep on going. Blood thus becomes the mortar of all Maya life. It's the substance that's going to seal any ritual and make it sacred and make it real.
Blood was also the price of royal power, and the king was required to pay that price. On special occasions, he would pierce the foreskin of his penis, allowing the blood to drip onto paper strips. Then the strips were burned, the ensuing smoke believed to awaken the gods so that they could be contacted by the king. Today, Palanque has the power to conjure up that long-ago time when a boy king, small and innocent, would be led into a dark underground chamber, there to pay the price of royalty with his own blood.
My imagination tells me that Pakal the Great was taken as a child down into the subterranean chambers of the palace. There he was confronted with masked demons that would represent underworld gods, very horrible and frightening beings, that he may have been required to let blood from his tongue or even from his genitals, that he would have been possibly forced to sit in utter darkness for periods of time until he hallucinated and communed with the supernatural beings that came to him in that place. It might last for days. And then the child would finally come out into the throne room, blinking into the light. It'd be a shock to come back out into the light, and sat upon the throne. He would go up into the scaffold above the palace, and the throng below would see the young king up there and cheer for him and recognize that he had ascended into heaven and that he was now the king.
One of the highlights of life among the Maya was the proclamation of a new king, an event accompanied by great ritual and ceremony.
One of the crucial points that occurs in the life of any city or state is the transferal of power. The king is dead, long live the king. That sentence alone presents the argument for the continuity of power from one king who is dead to the next king who is about to take over. I think that the Maya created really a broad framework for political theater, for how accession took place and how many rituals took place. The rituals we're talking about include large processions of people within plazas, climbing staircases at the tops of pyramids, inside of buildings out of the view of the public, and then reappearing again.
But even with the cheering crowd, the king would know that the blood he shed was not enough.
He needed to go out and capture the sacrificial victims in battle that he would need in order to demonstrate his prowess, his personal power and authority to become king.
The people that are represented decorating this courtyard are all sacrificial victims. Each of these men represents a kingdom that had been conquered or attacked by Pakal the Great, who had captured these men and then stripped them down and prepared them for sacrifice and eventually killed them.
One of the panels depicts a king taken captive from another city. He has had his penis cut and is forced to spill his blood for the gods of Palanque. Then he would suffer a slow and painful death.
This specific courtyard at Palenque, this is probably one of the major areas where they were offered. Right next to the courtyard, just to the north, is the ball court. We know from inscriptions that Maya captives would be taken, kept at the site for a while, and then made to be played ball.
But at the end of the game, the results were always the same. The loser was brutally sacrificed to the gods, often by decapitation.
For Maya, sacrifice was a slow and I think very grisly matter. After all, we see in Maya art, we see fingernails being torn out, the ends of fingers themselves, that final digit being trimmed off. Teeth may have been pulled out. Lords were forced to undergo penis perforation, to undergo bloodletting from various parts of the body.
Warfare between Maya cities was frequent. Its purpose was not merely for gaining territory, but for capturing royalty to be offered as sacrifice to the gods.
Maya warfare was about sacrifice and capturing your enemy. Now, the most important enemy that you could take was not a low-level Joe on the field, but the most high-ranking individual. At times, Maya kings did fall prey to other Maya kings in battle.
Proof of King Pakal's success as a military leader is prominently displayed in this courtyard, where he created a gallery to celebrate his victories. His reign would last all of 67 years. Under him, the city of Palenque was not only protected from outside attack, but was transformed into a virtual Renaissance center in which art and culture were encouraged to flourish. But this thriving metropolis was destined to become a ruin. Just a century after Pakal's reign, Palenque was abandoned. Why? In 1994, Mexican archaeologist Arnaldo Gonzalez Cruz was looking for the remains of King Pakal's firstborn son, himself a builder of several structures at Palenque.
Fanny is the assistant I had in the excavation. I couldn't even tell her what I saw in the interior. She kept saying, "What did you see?" And I said, "I see. You better look for yourself." Because of my emotion at that moment, I could not say it. And I went outside to scream, "We've hit it! We've hit it!"
Cruz made an unexpected discovery, one that the President of Mexico himself came to see, together with the world's press.
Primera sensación es al momento de terminar de quitar
At the moment we finished removing these small stones in the corner, a draft of freezing air came out. I got goosebumps and a strong smell, which we immediately identified as cinnabar. We were able to get a light in to see inside. And to our surprise, what we were seeing in the interior was a sarcophagus. I couldn't speak. That is, the words wouldn't come out, and I had to go outside to scream, to get out that emotion I was feeling at the time, and that I am still feeling now.
Crews did not find the bones of Pakal's son, as expected, but the bones of an unknown woman, a royal woman covered with red cinnabar and a jade mask. Who was she?
We knew it was someone of importance just by seeing the sarcophagus. At that moment, we weren't thinking of any particular name. Later, after the calm, we started to make the connection. We thought about the women represented in Palanque.
Scholars have debated who this woman was in relation to the great King Pakal. In Palanque's history, there are two women who feature prominently in the stone inscriptions.
There is his great-grandmother. She is the only woman in Maya history to have ruled on her own. She ruled with no male mentioned in the inscriptions at the time that she was alive. She died 3 years after Pakal was born. So if she's in the tomb should date to about 608 to 610. The second possibility for who's in the tomb is a woman named Lady Zak Kook. She was Pakal's mother. She held the throne on her own for 3 years after her probably father's brother died.
It is doubtful that the woman could be Pakal's great-grandmother or even his mother, for the ceramics found with the body date to a much later period. For now, it is too early to tell, for the age of the bones have not yet been established. But another discovery in the tomb hints at why the city of Palenque was abandoned so suddenly. After close scrutiny, archaeologist David Friedel believes this was not originally a tomb at all, but a subterranean chamber used for ancient religious ritual.
This is an underground house, a magic house, as the Maya would say. A place where kings were made. It's fantastic.
If this was a subterranean chamber for sacred ritual, then why was a body buried here? And who was she? The wall indicated that the passageway was incomplete. Impressions of handprints were clearly evident on the surface.
These handprints were put on this wall over 1,200 years ago. You just put your hand right in that place. You can feel them slapping that clay right on the wall. I wonder why they did that.
What brought work on the chamber to a standstill? Some scholars believe that the corridor was widened in order to bring in the enormous sarcophagus. Mourners may then have tried to narrow the opening as part of the funeral ritual. It may be their handprints that tell of some mysterious event here.
Archaeologists don't get to see events very often. This is an event. This happened. It happened really quickly. It happened in conjunction with a funeral. It just happened, and then they stopped.
What provoked the people to leave so suddenly? Do the hurried imprints on the wall speak of an invasion? or perhaps some other catastrophic event which caused the people to leave the walls unfinished. No greater mystery surrounds the Maya than their sudden disappearance. How could a civilization that flourished so successfully for over 600 years suddenly cease to be? Palanque was the first of the abandoned Maya cities, but within a few decades the entire Maya kingdom had vanished. The civilization had simply disappeared.
Was there a hurricane? Was there a tornado? Was there an earthquake? We know that they didn't die from a disease. We know that they didn't die from a variety of other potential causes of the collapse. And in the end, what we're dealing with is one of the most rapid depopulations of an area, not through a disease, that has ever occurred within human time.
One theory suggests that the peasant class rose up against the elite and destroyed them. There is evidence at one site where the faces of rulers have been decimated on monuments, their features destroyed by crude instruments. But if the peasants revolted, then why didn't they destroy the faces of King Pakal? Unlike other Maya cities, why was Palenque left so undamaged?
There are two possible reasons why people left Palenque intact. One is that it was not destroyed in war, and in the end the people just abandoned the political order of the kingship here. But the other possibility is that the people who attacked it and destroyed the final government so revered the art intrinsically that they left it alone.
Another theory about the collapse of the Maya is one based on their spiritual beliefs.
Prophecies about the future and understanding the past was a very important part of the ancient Maya world. They could look into the future and perhaps understand what was going to happen. One of the arguments that has been made is, in fact, that the Maya prophesized their own collapse, that they, in some sense, psyched themselves out. It's an interesting argument because it places the collapse not within the economic world, but within the mind.
Evidence for this theory has yet to be found, but another possible clue to the sudden disappearance of the people was found 100 miles from Palenque at the ancient site of Dos Pilas. In 1991, a team of archaeologists uncovered a royal tomb here. Buried near the king were inscriptions which spoke of political unrest and war between the Maya city-states, a war some believe would explain the collapse of their civilization.
Warfare seems to be the one that we are focusing upon today as perhaps one of the primary causes for the collapse. I tend to think of warfare as a symptom of other problems and not perhaps the actual cause of the collapse itself. It probably entailed problems in terms of the environment. Perhaps there wasn't enough food in certain city areas, that they needed to get more food from another neighboring city. And what we begin to see is that the system, which needs to bend, always has to react to these problems, perhaps became too rigid over a period of time, and that the system, instead of bending, cracked.
While their classic civilization has disappeared, the Maya people have not. Over 4 million of their descendants still live today. Over the last decades, thousands have been killed in a civil war. But through it all, most people simply continued to weave their cloth and farm their corn. Today, close to the ancient city of Palenque, live the Chol. They too are descendants of the Maya. They speak their own language and do not understand Spanish. The portrait of King Pakal appears on their walls, but to most of these people, he remains a total stranger. In the highlands of Guatemala, Maya expert Linda Shele has been working with the Mayans, teaching them to read their ancient language.
We're giving back the Maya who wish it the capacity to read the inscriptions in the original without the intervention of anybody else. What that gives them, or will give them eventually, is control over their own history. Any people in the world want the right to determine how the rest of the world sees them. That's the nature of history. It tells you where your roots come from, who you are, what your expectations are. Other people have been doing that for the Maya for 500 years, and they want that back.
After centuries of isolation from their past and intense political suppression, the Maya are reclaiming their 3,000-year-old heritage. Many want to speak their ancient language.
Now, I don't think Maya glyphs are ever going to come back as the main writing system of any Maya community. They're too cumbersome, they're too hard to learn to use, and so forth. But I can see a time where when you drive through Guatemala or Mexico and you come to a town, they'll have the name of the town there in Spanish, and they'll have it in Latin characters, and down below will be the glyph for the name.
The lifestyle of the Maya may have changed dramatically, but these are a people whose history stretches back into ancient times, a time when this landscape echoed to the sounds of a flourishing and vital civilization.
There was a diaspora of people leaving that region, but why that occurred, what terrible thing happened at the end of the Classic, that's one of the great mysteries, that's one of the great debates.
The Maya may still live in Central America, but something drove them from their once magnificent cities, allowing the jungle to reclaim much of their history.
It lay before us like a shattered bark in the midst of the ocean, her masts gone, her name effaced, her crew perished, and none to tell whence she came, to whom she belonged, how long on her voyage, or what caused her destruction. John Lloyd Stevens.
Perhaps a valuable lesson for the modern world lies here in the glimmering sunlight of southern Mexico. For despite wonders carved from the raw material of the jungle, this was a civilization that endures now only in ruins and in memory. Little else could set a greater challenge to those who peer backwards in time through the veil of history. For like the Maya, nothing prevails forever, and all glory is but fleeting.